All right, so now we're moving on to the second type of loop in this section, which is the while loop. So both while and for loops can be used to iterate over a collection or to repeat something 10 times. Anything you can do with a for loop, we could do with a while loop. That's what I'm trying to say. But there's also a lot of things you can do with a while loop that you can't do with a for loop. So I think of while loops as a distant cousin, some sort of far off relative to a conditional statement, an if statement. So here's the syntax. So we have while, and then we provide a Boolean expression. So this is a single variable, I'm tired, which is a Boolean variable set to true or false. But it could be something like while x is greater than 20, or while number is less than 100. Basically, any Boolean expression goes in this while loop, so we fill in the blank here. And whatever code we have inside the loop indented will run while this is true. So while loops continue to execute while a condition is truthy. So just like a conditional statement will execute once if a condition is truthy, a while loop will continue to execute while it is truthy, but then at some point it should become falsy, and that will stop the loop. So here's another example. We set user response, a variable, to be empty. We set it to none. We could also do an empty string. And then we write while user response is not equal to please. Notice the colon, just like all the other loops and conditional statements. So while the user does not type the word please, ask the user for a different input and say, you didn't say the magic word. So the effect of this is the first time through, user response is none. So this right here is true. User response is not equal to please. So then we ask again, and update user response. And let's say this time I type in hello. Well, that's also not equal to please. So it repeats and it asks again. And then this time I say please. And then the loop halts. And that makes this condition falsy, so everything finishes. So I did mention you could do everything you can do with a for loop using a while loop, but they do require more setup because you need to have usually an existing variable that you're using. So you declare a separate variable, unlike in a for loop where we can create a temporary variable that only exists in that loop, and we don't have to actually initialize it on our own. And one last warning before we dive into writing some while loops. You need to be careful because the way that a while loop works is it continues running while something is true. And if you never flip it over, if you never take that condition and make it false, the loop will continue forever. And yeah, it's called an infinite loop. And it won't like ruin your machine or anything. You'll need to halt it, but it will ruin your program. Nothing else will be able to happen. It will keep going forever until you intervene. So that's not good. We don't want that. So I'll show you an example of what would cause that. But let's start by typing some simple while loops. So I'll make a file. I'll call it while.py. And let's start by doing a simple loop that asks for user input. So let's say message equals input. What's the secret password? And then we'll have a while. So while message is not equal to, what should our password be? Let's have our password be bananas, colon. We're going to first print wrong, and then let's just re-update message and ask for what's the secret password. And then afterwards, we'll say correct. Okay, so we're going to ask for input, and if the user enters anything other than bananas, this is going to be true. Message is not equal to bananas, so we're going to print wrong, then we're going to ask for message again. And then this should eventually, hopefully, our user types in bananas, and it's going to be me, and I'm going to type bananas, which will make this false. Message will be equal to bananas, which then halts the execution of the loop, and we move on to print correct. So this, whatever comes afterwards, only runs when this finishes. Okay, let's try it. Python 3, while.py. Oh, Python 2, what am I doing? There we go. What's the secret password? Blue, purple, orange, or rain, pie, and let's go with bananas now. Bananas, correct, and it stops. So that's our first example of a while loop. Okay, so I'm going to comment that out and leave it here. And now I'm going to show you how you could convert a for loop to a while loop, or how you can use them interchangeably. So let's say we want to print the numbers from 1 to 10. I know, very boring. With a for loop, we could just do for num in range 1, and we need to go to 11 because it's exclusive, and then we'll just print num, right? So we've seen this before, we get 1 through 10. With a while loop, we can do the same thing, but we need to first declare a variable. So I could call this one num, or let's go with, num is fine, equals, and we'll start it at our first number, which is 1. Then what we need to do, have our while loop, while num is less than 11, or we could do less than or equal to 10, either one, but I'll do less than 11. We're going to print num. But if we leave it at this, can you tell what's going to happen? We'll get an infinite loop because num is set to 1 and it never changes. So 1 is always less than 11, so this just goes forever and ever and ever and ever until we force quit it. Let's see what happens. Generally don't want to try and get these. Yeah, there we go. Okay, I'm going to halt that with Command C or Control C. And you can see we got, oh man, I'm scrolling as fast as I can. A couple thousand, maybe 10,000 or more ones printed out. So we don't want to do that. Num never changed from 1. So what we need to do is update num. So I'm going to do num plus equals 1. It's the same as num equals num plus 1. So we're adding 1 to it each time. Just like this works, where there's a range, it starts at 1, it prints num, and then num is then incremented to 2, and it prints num is incremented to 3. And once it gets to 10, it stops. Same idea, except in a while loop, we have to declare the variable first, and we have to update it manually on our own. Okay, let's try it now. There we go, 1 to 10. Okay, so that shows how we can take a for loop and convert it to a while loop, or that we could use a while loop in place of a for loop. But if you're just trying to do things like print numbers, well, that's not a good example, but if you're trying to do something that you could do with a for loop, I generally use a for loop because it's shorter and quicker. So a last change we could make, if I wanted to only print odd numbers, for example, what I could do is just change what I'm incrementing by. So if let me clear my console, run that again, we get 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. And we could also add a conditional statement in here, whatever code we want, just like we can with a for loop. So really the way a while loop works is it's just like a single if statement, except it continues to run until that condition is false. And you just have to be conscientious about infinite loops. That will get you into some trouble. So that's it for loops, or for while loops at this point. We're going to get some practice with exercises. But really, just to sum it all up, both loops, you can print numbers out, or you can loop a specific number of times. But the difference with a while loop is it's more flexible, where you might have something that might run once, it might run 50 times, and you don't know because it's built upon a Boolean expression. So it might be using user input, it might be getting data from a database and looping through that, versus a for loop like we have right here this loop will always run 10 times. This while loop, could run 10,000 times or could run once. So while loops are more flexible, but if you do need something to happen a set number of times, a for loop is much shorter and more pretty. It's more, succinct. Anyway, so that's enough of talking at you. Let's do some exercises. Let's try building a couple things with while loops.